Next on KQED Newsroom, low-wage workers barely making ends meet stage protests to raise the minimum wage.
Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, that it's a fantasy still for me. I can't afford any of it.
The movement is picking up steam here in the Bay Area and across the country. Plus, Stanford University design students tackle tough problems in the developing world with an eye on affordability.
You see the assignment? You're going to build a freestanding structure to capture water coming from a simulated monsoon.
And Nelson Mandela, his legacy and his impact on the Bay Area.
We must keep the pressure on apartheid until victory is achieved.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. On Thursday, fast food workers took to the streets here in the Bay Area and across the country demanding an increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It was the latest action in a nationwide push, and it comes on the heels of a recent backlash against companies scheduling low-wage employees to work on Thanksgiving. The movement is gaining momentum. President Obama called for higher wages in a speech this week.
I'm going to keep pushing until we get a higher minimum wage for hard-working Americans across the entire country. It will be good for our economy. It will be good for our families.
But some economists argue raising the minimum wage could hurt the very people it's intended to help by killing jobs and pushing prices up. Joining me now to discuss this further are Ron Unz with the Higher Wages Alliance and Ken Jacobs with the UC Berkeley Labor Center. Before we dive into the discussion, though, let's first take a look at what it's like to live on less than $10 an hour through the eyes of one fast food worker.
My name is Guadalupe Salazar. I work at McDonald's for 18 months already. I work drive-through window doing cashiering, taking orders. I earn $8 per hour.
Guadalupe Salazar works a 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift at the McDonald's in Oakland's Eastmont Mall. She says she enjoys the job itself.
I love working at McDonald's. I love taking care of the customers.
But even after working close to 40 hours a week, Salazar says she's just scraping by.
I make $8 per hour. With all the deductions, it comes out to $532. 2-week pay period. $8 per hour is not enough. That's not enough even for one only person. Like me, I'm a single mom of a 6-year-old. I can afford to have my daughter with me full time like I wish. And I don't spend a lot of money because I try to save as much as possible just in case of something. So that I basically eat off the $1 menu.
Salazar says she saves up all year to take her daughter to the circus.
We always have our face painted, always, the same or something like that.
On Thursday, Salazar walked off the job along with other fast food workers around the country to highlight their plight.
We are striking. And we are striking because we want $15 per hour in the union.
Salazar says a pay hike would mean spending more money in the community and boosting the economy.
I will be able to have decent dinners on my table, not just a couple noodles. And basically, I will be able to provide for my daughter, which is very important for me. Having that kid happy. Not just, oh, mommy, can I have this? And I go, like, no, honey, you know I have no money. Oh, okay, mommy. When you have money, can I have it? Sure, honey, when I have money, you can have anything you want. So that will be what I will do.
So that's Guadalupe's statement. Ron, I want to begin with you. You're the author of a new ballot initiative to raise California's minimum wage to $12 an hour, lower than the $15 that Guadalupe and her fellow fast food workers are asking for. What did you think of her story?
I think it's a very realistic account of the day-to-day lives of so many of the low-wage workers in California, how they're struggling under very difficult positions, and they don't have the dollars to spend in our economy to revive us after this recession.
And Ken Jacobs, do you think that the minimum wage should be raised to $15 an hour, and what effects would that have?
Well, I think California does need a raise in the minimum wage, and in fact, we will have one now going up to $10 over the next several years. And what we're seeing is in urban areas, certain cities are also raising the wages higher than that. The city of SeaTac just passed one, doesn't cover everyone, but it'll be $15 an hour for the airport and for hotels near the airport. And the city of Seattle is looking for a much higher minimum wage. What we've seen from the research on minimum wages in general is overall, it has a tremendous boost in people's earnings, and we see the evidence shows either no impact on employment or very small. Now, we haven't seen a broad-based minimum wage increase to $15 an hour in the past, but I think these workers are calling for, in their industry, to have $15 an hour and a union, and it's a sensible demand.
Well, there are a number of studies, though, that will contradict what you're saying. I mean, for example, David Newmark, an economics professor at UC Irvine, he says that a $15 minimum wage would actually result in a roughly 5% reduction in employment. There's an economics professor at University of Massachusetts Amherst who says if we do this, $15 an hour, it could push up fast food prices by 20%. And hurting the very low-income families that a higher minimum wage is intended to help, because they often frequent fast food places because it's a lower type of meal, lower cost type of meal. What do you make of those studies that contradicts what you're saying?
If fast food workers' wages were raised to $15 an hour, that would be absorbed through a variety of ways. Part of that is higher prices, and you would have somewhat higher prices. Part of it would be absorbed through the savings from lower turnover, the cost of hiring new workers, training workers, unemployment insurance. And then some part of the cost could be absorbed through lower profits. And the key thing here would be in the fast food industry to reduce those franchise fees, because the fast food industry is incredibly profitable, $7 billion in profits in the last year.
Do you think they would actually do that, though? Lower their franchise fees?
The question here is going to be how much consumer pressure is there on the fast food industry to start addressing the issues of their workers.
And Ron, you think $12 an hour is more reasonable than $15 an hour. Why is that?
It seems to me, obviously at some point when you raise wages, the minimum wage too high, you really will get substantial loss of employment, which would be a problem. I think 12 is close enough to the existing level that you'd see minimal loss of jobs. And for example, if you take a company like Walmart that around the country has hundreds of thousands of low-wage workers, studies have shown that if you raise the Walmart wages to a minimum of $12, Walmart could absorb the costs by raising their prices 1% one time. It would cost the average consumer an extra $12, $13 a year, which I think most people could afford to pay, and it would put $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 a year or more in the pockets of those workers and drive the sort of consumer demand that Walmart really needs to do well as a company.
These companies, and you did a study on this, talking about how a lot of low-income workers rely on public assistance, and that I think extends as well to low-income workers at big stores like Walmart. And these are the workers who get food stamps, get Medicaid, and rely on public assistance programs. Is it a form of corporate welfare?
Exactly.
What these companies are doing?
It's a classic case. A business obviously tries to privatize its benefits, the work of its workers, and socialize the costs, shift the burden as much as possible onto the backs of the taxpayers. If we had a $12 minimum wage in the United States, taxpayers around the country would save tens of billions of dollars, because businesses would then have to pay their own workers instead of forcing the taxpayers to give them earned income tax credits, food stamps, housing subsidies. We're really talking about forcing businesses to stand on their own 2 feet rather than receiving corporate welfare.
And Ken, the UC Berkeley Labor Center is the center that did that study.
That's right, and we found that over half, 52% of the families of fast food workers, as frontline fast food workers, rely on one or more public assistance programs to make ends meet. And that's true even for workers working 40 hours a week. We also find that only 13% have health care benefits through their jobs. So in order to get by, they need to rely on these public assistance programs.
I should point out that we did reach out to business groups and several more conservative scholars who are on the other side of this debate from where you stand, and none were available. However, the National Restaurant Association did send us this statement, and they're saying that the restaurant industry has been one of the few industries that continue to create jobs during the recession and the economic recovery. Dramatic increases in a starting wage, such as those called for in the rallies that we've seen around the country, will challenge that job growth history, increase prices for restaurant meals, and lead to fewer jobs created.
The restaurant industry is growing quickly. The problem is not the number of jobs here in the restaurant industry, it's the quality of jobs. You potentially could see some effects on the margin, but the impact of those workers having more dollars in their pocket is really important. And I do want to clarify one thing. The fast food workers aren't calling for across-the-board $15 minimum wage throughout the United States. In some cities, they're looking at higher minimum wages, and we've seen that work in a city like San Francisco. And they're calling for a union and to have those wages in their industry. And the restaurant industry, or especially the fast food industry, is extremely profitable. They could do this, and the real question is between the organizing and the consumer pressure, and in some cases, public policy measures like a higher local minimum wage, can they get those wages up and make that difference?
And this week, President Obama weighed in. He's also calling for a higher minimum wage now. Do you think that will add to the kind of public pressure that you just mentioned? Will it make a difference in shifting the debate?
That's actually one reason I think an initiative is such a powerful vehicle in something like this. People have been talking about raising the minimum wage at the federal level for a couple of years now. Nothing's happened. It moves in Congress, it dies. Suddenly, we're talking about the voters of California deciding whether or not it makes sense for businesses to pay their own employees rather than for the taxpayers to subsidize them. And I think a $12 minimum wage will be very popular in California and put a lot of pressure on Congress to consider doing something similar on the federal level.
You know, this debate has been raging for years, the minimum wage debate. Ultimately, what do you think it will come down to, though, for a solution? Will it be more a matter of increased public pressure, consumer pressure, or do you have to go the legislative route through referendums, through initiatives, through local city council measures?
I think there's really a mix. We need a higher national minimum wage, and the Senate will be debating $10.10 an hour. And that makes sense as a floor nationally. We have even higher than that minimum wages being done in states, which also, given the economic difference between states, and in urban areas, cities like San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose, other places looking either have or will raise the minimum wages there. And you also need stronger unions. And if we look at what's happened in terms of some of the decline in wages in this country, it goes hand in hand with the decline in the share of workers who are in unions. So that combination of organizing, consumer pressure, and policy makes the difference. And the interesting thing right now, seeing these organizations of fast food workers, the organizations of Walmart workers, who are really bringing the issue out in a way that we haven't seen, I think that's the right formula in terms of making change.
And Ron, you're a conservative. This is not normally a conservative cause. Why are you embracing this personally?
Well, I come from a scientific background. I look at issues on a case-by-case basis. Many times I think the conservative side is the right one. Sometimes I don't. But here, interestingly enough, once I've started going through some of these arguments with conservatives I know, including people who are very staunch conservatives, they really look at the issue in a new light. Because it's not a question of the workers not getting these extra dollars, but it's a question of who gives it to them. Is it the employer or is it the taxpayer? And I think it makes much more sense for the taxpayers not to have to subsidize all these private businesses through food stamps, through the earned income tax credit, and force these businesses to pay their own workers.
Do you agree? Obviously you do.
I think that's absolutely right. Where we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, where we're seeing the growth in the economy is in these low-wage sectors. We've seen a decline in middle-class jobs in the country. We need to do something to raise the bottom, get more consumer demand back in the economy, deal with some of the issues of income inequality. To do that, we've got to raise the floor. And this combination of public policies like minimum wage laws, this kind of organizing we're seeing in consumer pressure, all can come together to begin to do that.
Okay, well, very interesting, and much more debate to come in the new year, I'm sure, with congressional calls as well for a federal minimum wage hike. So I want to thank you both for being here, Ken Jacobs and Ron Unz. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The Bay Area has long been known as an incubator of innovation. One epicenter of that creativity is the Institute of Design at Stanford, also known as the D School. The D School nurtures outside-the-box thinking in hopes of tackling some of the world's toughest problems. It's the focus of a new documentary called Extreme by Design. It follows groups of Stanford grad students working to create extremely affordable solutions to address poverty in the developing world. Scott Schaefer sat down earlier with filmmaker Ralph King and former D School student Pamela Pavkov. But first, here's a clip from Extreme by Design.
Before departing for their field research, each of the teams must come up with several crude prototypes.
So this is a vertical axis wind turbine. It captures wind by using drag.
So the first prototype we built was simply a balloon over a syringe, and it sort of works when I don't break it.
You can actually turn this device on, and this is why it's called a bubble CPAP device. It actually bubbles. And you can actually increase or decrease that. Oops.
This will be a real kind of epic personal journey for me. I feel like my life is about to change. Yeah.
Well, Ralph King and Pam Pavkov, welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
The basis of this film and of the course is this design thinking concept. Describe it. What is it?
Well, design thinking, I feel, is the crown jewel of 21st century education, is a creative process. It's a way of unlocking your innate creativity, and it's problem solving, essentially, steps to problem solving.
How is it different from brainstorming, or is it a part of brainstorming?
Brainstorming is one element of it. Another element of it is empathetic listening. Another element of it is prototyping, actually converting ideas into physical materials. And then the last step is user testing. So.
And Pam, you were part of a team that went to Bangladesh, and you were working on a breathing apparatus for little infants with pneumonia. Describe the process you went through with your team, and what were some of the aha moments you had?
Sure. Well, the first step was really just garnering empathy for the patient population that we were seeking to serve.
Why is that so important?
To really put ourselves in their shoes and understand the conditions under which they would be using a solution, and really empathize with the problem that they're experiencing. And so our first objective was really to get deep into understanding neonatal health and the challenges thereof in the developing world.
And you had to also develop, and this is part of something that all the teams dealt with, is you had to, not only did it have to be affordable, but it had to be acceptable, culturally and otherwise. Talk
Correct.
About that process, and that's part of empathy too, I guess.
Yes, I think what that proved to be an incredibly important step, but also a very daunting one, in that, understanding a completely different culture and way of life, and then how that translates into actually getting a solution to the patient. Our device was a bit complicated by the fact that there are in fact so many different stakeholders involved in its use. You have the patient being the child, you have the parents or the mother most often, and you have the doctors and nurses that are actually administering the treatment. And all of those were effectively our users.
And of course, failure is inevitable in a process like this. Describe the role of failure and failing fast.
Well, it's encouraged in this design thinking process because you learn from failure more than you learn from quote-unquote success. And so the idea is to get your prototype out there quickly, have people reacting to it so you can go back and do it again and again and again, and each time reflecting the learnings as you go.
And Pam, you, in that clip we saw earlier, you talked about this is going to be a big change for you. It's going to change you personally. I want to play another clip. This is with you and some of your teammates in Bangladesh, and we'll watch that and then we'll come back and talk.
I think it's really hard being here because you just, you know, there's no difference between the way that, like, I look and the way these moms look. They're basically the same. It's kind of totally random that I'm a Stanford student in California with every opportunity to treat my child, and she doesn't. I hate that. It just feels so unfair.
And Pam, did you know at the beginning of this that you'd be going back to Bangladesh as a Bangladeshi American?
I did know that I would be going to the country as part of our project. I had actually never been there. Our family's not been there since India and Bangladesh separated as countries. But I was very keen on the opportunity to leverage my knowledge and insight as somebody originally from that part of the world in our empathy building.
And what's going through your mind in that clip? It seems like it's a combination of guilt almost, or just like wonder at how am I here and they're, you know, in the situation they're in.
Yeah, I think in that particular moment, it was definitely more guilt and kind of sick to my stomach feeling, recognition that, you know, there was really no difference between myself and the patient population I was seeking to help in so many ways. And their situation actually felt quite hopeless, I would say, at that stage in our process. I think now, looking back on that experience, I feel exceptional responsibility to kind of continue to tap into that moment and feeling and apply it to contributing in some positive way in recognition of the fact that, yes, I am disproportionately lucky. And in fact, I haven't really earned that right in so many respects.
And Ralph, I know you're taking this same concept of design thinking and using it in middle schools in East Palo Alto and Redwood City. Describe how it applies for kids that age.
Well, it's something that I think middle school is a sweet spot for introducing design thinking because the kids haven't had the creativity totally crushed out of them yet, which by high school many of them have. But what we've done is taken the teachings of the course and kind of simplified it. And we have a workbook that we've developed like this, which we're testing now. And the hope is that in a 10-week sort of deep dive in design thinking, that kids can start to use it in their schoolwork. And my goal is that within the next couple of years, let's say 100,000 kids are using, and students and graduates are using design thinking in their work.
Quick answer, what do you want people who see this film to take away from it?
Well, I would like them to be inspired. I would like them to think that if they see a problem in the world that they can fix it. And I would like them to explore design thinking.
All right, the film is called Extreme by Design. Ralph King and Pam Pavkov, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Scott Schaefer recorded that interview earlier today. Extreme by Design airs here on KQED on Wednesday, December 11th at 10 p.m. Turning now to Nelson Mandela, who died this week at the age of 95. The Bay Area had been a hub of the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s. Mandela visited here shortly after his release from a South African prison in 1990. His appearance filled the Oakland Coliseum. And Scott Schaefer is here with me now to discuss the legacy left by Nelson Mandela. We had such a special relationship here with him in the Bay Area, didn't we?
We really did. You can see in that clip, Twee, with tens of thousands of people packing in the Oakland Coliseum. It really was an extraordinary time. I think people this week are remembering back to the 80s and even the 70s, the late 70s, when Berkeley and San Francisco really formed the hub of a movement that moved eastward. It was a real coalition of students, labor, local officials, politicians, the governor, who was a Republican, George Deukmejian, all pressuring, working together and pressuring the South African government to ultimately let Mandela out of prison and then end apartheid.
And in fact, Congressman Ron Dellums was a key figure in that. He pretty much led the effort in Congress to win federal sanctions against South Africa. And he spoke at that event in 1990 at the Oakland Coliseum. And we actually have a clip from that. Let's take a look.
City of Berkeley stood up. The city of Oakland stood up. The city of San Francisco stood up. The Longshoremen Union stood up. And the people of this community over and over stood up. So I'm asking you now, stand up. Give yourselves a hand.
And you know, Twee, the extraordinary thing there is that Dellums had to introduce that time and again. And when it finally passed in 1986, President Reagan vetoed it. And the Senate at the time, the U.S. Senate, which was dominated by Republicans, overrode the president's veto. And so it's what's interesting to me, too, about this week is that, you know, at the time, these issues are very divisive and people are on both sides. But with time, the passage of time, you see which was the right side to be on. And you don't necessarily know that at the moment, but looking back, it's very clear that there were some people way out in front.
And looking at that, it brought back memories for me as well, because Dellums talked about the city of Berkeley standing up, and I was a student at UC Berkeley in the mid-1980s, and that was such a hub for the anti-apartheid protests. Some of the most powerful protests happened there, and you know, in 1985, 10,000 students boycotted their classes the day after. About 160 protesters were arrested, and it was such an electrifying time. It was a topic that really united so many people from all different backgrounds in a way that few leaders can.
Yeah, and I think that's really true of the Bay Area, and it has been for a long time. People come here like you did and like I did from other places, and they get here and they often come from places where there was oppression, a lack of freedom, and they are so determined to be a part of any movement to expand the cause of freedom throughout the world. And I think this is a case of that happening here with Nelson Mandela and apartheid.
And it's just extraordinary. After nearly 3 decades in prison, having lost his freedom for that long, he never lost his values. He always hung on to the belief that hatred doesn't accomplish anything.
And you hope that maybe there'll be some lessons we can all learn today in this time of gridlock and, you know, partisan bitterness.
Yeah, a peace broker, a moral compass, and a man I don't think anyone will forget.
A man of great conscience.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you for sharing those insights. And for all of KQED's news coverage, you can go to kqednews.org.
I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks so much for watching.
I'm Twee Vu. Have a good night.